Hollywood loves churning out World War II films, but for every Saving Private Ryan, there's a disaster that makes veterans cringe. Did you know one notorious World War II flop was funded by a cult leader? Another was so bad, it made Eisenhower publicly denounce it. From propaganda disasters to historical train wrecks, these films didn't just miss the mark, they obliterated it. Let's count down the absolute worst World War II movies that should have been court-martialed from theaters. 15th place, Flyboys, 2006. Flyboys tried to soar but crashed hard with its tale of American pilots in the Lafayette Escadrille during World War I. Wait, what? Yes, this movie about World War I somehow snuck onto our WE2 list. And that's exactly the kind of sloppy attention to detail that plagues this $60 million disaster. Director Dean Devlin stuffed the film with so many historical inaccuracies, you'd think he learned history from cereal boxes. The romanticized dogfights look pretty, but insult the intelligence of anyone who knows basic aviation history. Critics savaged it, with Roger Ebert calling it a video game disguised as a movie. The film bombed harder than its on-screen targets, recouping only half its massive budget. Even the aerial sequences, the one thing that should have worked, drew mockery for physics-defying stunts that would make a flight instructor have a panic attack. Flyboys represents that perfect Hollywood combo: expensive, ignorant, and utterly forgettable. 14th place, Revolution, 1985. Al Pacino's most regrettable career decision wasn't saying yes to Jack and Jill. It was starring in Revolution, a catastrophic Revolutionary War epic that was so bad it drove him to quit making movies for 4 years. The film attempts to depict the entire American Revolution through the eyes of a fur trapper. But the only revolutionary thing was how quickly audiences fled theaters. Pacino's bizarre accent sounds like he's choking on a musket ball throughout. Director Hugh Hudson burned through a staggering $28 million, $1985, to create sets that look like they were assembled the morning of shooting. Critics ruthlessly dismembered it, with Vincent Canby of the New York Times calling it a mess of a movie so confused in its purpose and so jumbled in its storytelling that it's impossible to believe that it was written and directed by the same fellows who made Chariots of Fire. After this debacle, Pacino disappeared from Hollywood until 1989, proving some wounds take years to heal. 13th place, U-571, 2000. U-571 manages the rare feat of being both a box office success and a historical abomination. This underwater thriller follows American submariners capturing a German U-boat and its Enigma machine, which is fascinating except for one tiny detail. It was actually the British who did this, almost a full year before America even entered the war. The film so mangled history that Prime Minister Tony Blair called it an affront, and the British Parliament officially condemned it. Despite decent underwater tension and a cast including Matthew McConaughey and Harvey Keitel, the film drowns in its own audacious rewriting of history. Director Jonathan Mostow feebly defended it, saying it was just a movie, which went over about as well as you'd expect, with war veterans. Former Royal Navy submarine commander Tony True burned the film with the perfect torpedo. There were no Americans involved until long after we'd captured Enigma machines. The first was captured by the British in 1940. Oops. 12th place, Red Tails, 2012. Red Tails is what happens when good intentions crash into terrible execution. This George Lucas-produced tale of the Tuskegee Airmen should have been a powerful tribute to these pioneering black pilots. Instead, it delivers cardboard characters spouting dialogue, so wooden you could build a hangar with it. Lucas spent 20 years and $58 million of his own money on this project, proving once again that unlimited resources can't buy quality storytelling. The film's greatest crime is turning these real-life heroes into one-dimensional action figures. Historian Mark Harris blasted the film for reducing a complex historical narrative into a video game. Even worse, it mangled the actual historical record, falsely claiming the Tuskegee Airmen never lost a bomber they escorted, when records show they lost at least 25. The CGI aerial combat looks straight out of Star Wars, which might be impressive if this were science fiction and not supposed historical drama. Red Tail stands as a monument to missed opportunities. 11th place, Inchan, 1981. Inchan holds the distinction of being possibly the only war movie funded by a cult leader. Yes, Reverend Sun Myung Moon of the Unification Church bankrolled this $46 million Korean War disaster to the tune of $40 million. The result? One of the biggest financial flops in film history that actually starred Sir Laurence Olivier as General Douglas MacArthur in what must have been the low point of his illustrious career. Olivier later admitted he only took the role because "I needed the money." The production was so catastrophic it makes Apocalypse Now look organized. Multiple directors quit, the screenplay was constantly rewritten, and typhoons destroyed expensive sets. When finally released, critics eviscerated it, with the New York Times calling it a hysterical historical epic. The film was such an embarrassment, it was never released on VHS or DVD. When Ronald Reagan screened it at the White House, his only comment was, "For once we're the good guys, and the communists are the villains." High praise indeed. 10th place, Windalkers, 2002. Windalkers commits the cardinal sin of taking a fascinating true story, Navajo code talkers in WA2, and shoving it into the background to focus on Nicolas Cage making pained expressions for 2 hours. Director John Woo somehow turned the compelling story of Native Americans, whose language created an unbreakable code, into a generic action film, where the actual code talkers are secondary characters in their own story. The $115 million production bombed, earning just $77 million worldwide. Roger Ebert summed up the fundamental problem. The filmmakers have buried it beneath battlefield cliches, while centering the story on a white character played by Nicolas Cage. The film was so historically mangled it ranked 4th on CareerAfterMilitary.com's 10 most inaccurate military movies ever made. Woo later complained that the studio wanted a John Wayne movie, but audiences just wanted their money back after sitting through this tone-deaf disaster. 9th place, Which Way to the Front, 1970. When a comedy about World War II is so unfunny it makes you long for the somber reflection of Schindler's List, you know something has gone terribly wrong. Jerry Lewis directed and starred in this catastrophe as a millionaire rejected by the draft, who forms his own private army to fight Nazis. The result was so painfully unfunny and awkward that Lewis abandoned filmmaking for over a decade afterward. That's right, this movie was so bad it made one of America's most prolific filmmakers quit. Critics weren't just unimpressed, they were actively offended. Variety called it an embarrassment to everyone connected with it, while Roger Ebert refused to dignify it with a proper review. The film's attempts at humor include Lewis doing an offensive German accent while impersonating a Nazi general. Audiences stayed away in droves, and the film quickly vanished from theaters, only to occasionally resurface as a cautionary tale of comedy gone horribly wrong. 8th place, Stealth, 2005. Stealth might be the dumbest military movie ever made, a $135 million disaster about an AI-controlled fighter jet that becomes sentient after being struck by lightning. Yes, you read that correctly. Jamie Foxx, Jessica Biel, and Josh Lucas play pilots tasked with stopping the rogue aircraft, which has decided to start its own war. The film tries to be Top Gun meets 2001: A Space Odyssey, but ends up more like My Toddler Smashed His Toy Planes Together while watching The Terminator. Critics were merciless, with The Washington Post calling it a lot of noise and an insult to intelligence. The film crashed and burned at the box office, earning just $76 million against its massive budget. Director Rob Cohen, of the Fast and the Furious fame, later admitted the screenplay had issues, which is like saying the Titanic had a minor leak. Stealth now lives on as a cautionary tale about what happens when Hollywood throws money at a concept that sounds cool in a 3-word pitch, but makes absolutely no sense as a full movie. 7th place, Battlefield Earth, 2000. While technically set in the year 3000, this John Travolta vanity project, based on Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard's novel, features so many W2-era fighter planes and weapons that it qualifies for our list. The film follows humans rebelling against alien cyclos by learning to fly thousand-year-old Harriers and using nuclear weapons that somehow still work perfectly after a millennium. The result is one of the most notorious box office bombs in history, losing over $73 million. Everything about this film is catastrophically wrong. From the bizarre tilted camera angles, nearly 90% of shots are Dutch angles, to Travolta's dreadlocked alien performance that seems like he's auditioning for a demented Predator reboot. Battlefield Earth swept the Razzies, winning Worst Picture, Worst Actor, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, Worst Supporting Actor, Worst Screen Couple, and Worst Film of the Decade. Even Travolta eventually admitted, "I had no choice but to accept that responsibility for its failure." When your star apologizes for the movie's existence, you know you've reached epic levels of badness. Sixth place, All the Queen's Men, 2001. Imagine pitching this with a straight face. It's World War II, and Matt LeBlanc, yes, Joey from Friends, leads a team of male spies who cross-dress as female factory workers to steal an Enigma machine from Berlin. That's the actual plot of All the Queen's Men. A comedy so painfully unfunny, it makes you question whether humor itself is just a collective hallucination. The film cost $15 million to make and earned, wait for it, just $23,662 at the box office. That's not a typo. Critics unanimously crucified it, with Entertainment Weekly calling it so lame it makes Austin Powers look like masterpiece theater. Even worse, it completely wastes a premise with actual historical basis. British intelligence did consider infiltrating women-only factories during WW2. Instead, we get LeBlanc in a dress delivering lines with all the comedic timing of a funeral director. Rotten Tomatoes awarded it a rare 0% score, making it officially the worst-reviewed World War II film of all time. Fifth place, The Final Countdown, 1980. The Final Countdown stars Kirk Douglas as the captain of the USS Nimitz, which gets transported back in time to December 6, 1941, the day before Pearl Harbor. It's a fascinating what-if scenario that the film immediately squanders with glacial pacing, wooden dialogue, and special effects that wouldn't pass muster in a high school film class. The movie spends an excruciating amount of time showing actual Navy procedures before finally getting to its premise. The biggest crime is the ending, which delivers the most disappointing time travel cop-out in cinema history. After all the build-up about whether the crew will interfere with history, the film literally zaps them back to the present before they can do anything significant. Audiences left theaters feeling cheated, and critics weren't kind either. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote it off as a suspense film without any suspense. The Final Countdown remains a textbook example of a great concept completely wasted by terrible execution. Fourth place, The Green Berets, 1968. John Wayne's passion project about the Vietnam War has aged about as well as milk left in the Sahara. Released at the height of the Vietnam conflict, this propaganda piece was Wayne's attempt to drum up support for an increasingly unpopular war. The problem? He filmed it like a World War II movie, complete with black and white moral clarity that was wildly out of step with the complex realities of Vietnam. Critics immediately savaged it, with Renata Adler of the New York Times calling it unspeakable, stupid, rotten, and false. The film's historical inaccuracies are legendary, from geographical errors, the sun setting in the east in the final scene, to tactical blunders that would get entire platoons killed. Most egregiously, it portrays the war as a simple good versus evil conflict, completely ignoring the nuanced political realities that made Vietnam so divisive. Even decades later, military historian James Wilbanks notes that it's as if the producers had no understanding of the war or the terrain. The Green Berets stands as a perfect example of how propaganda masquerading as entertainment fails both as propaganda and entertainment. Third place, Assault on Hill, 400, 2023. When a film bills itself as being based on true events, but gets almost every detail wrong, you know you're in for a disaster. This direct-to-video mess attempts to tell the story of the U.S. 2nd Ranger Battalion's siege of Bergstein, Germany, but the results are so generic and amateurish, you'd swear it was made by film school dropouts. The real battle was a heroic moment for the Rangers. This film makes it look like a poorly organized paintball match. Everything from the uniforms to the weapons to the tactics screams, "We didn't bother with research." The actors, most visibly too old for the parts they're playing, deliver lines like they're reading them for the first time. Military consultant and historian Jonathan Jordan called it an insult to the men who actually fought there. With production values that would embarrass a high school theater department and CGI that looks like it was rendered on a calculator. Assault on Hill 400 represents the worst of modern war film exploitation, using real heroism to sell a product not worth the digital space it occupies. Second place, Battle of the Bulge, 1965. When your World War II movie is so historically inaccurate that President Eisenhower himself publicly denounces it, you know you've created something special. Battle of the Bulge takes one of the most important conflicts of the European theater and reduces it to a collection of embarrassing errors. The film shows the battle taking place on sunny, flat Spanish plains, instead of the snow-covered forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. That's like filming a movie about the Alamo set in a shopping mall. The tanks used are post-war models that look nothing like World War II vehicles. The tactics portrayed would get entire divisions slaughtered, and the timeline is compressed from weeks to days. Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw, and Charles Bronson try their best, but they can't save this $6.5 million disaster that only grossed $4.5 million. Military historian S.L.A. Marshall wrote that the film contains distortions and errors so monstrous that the effect is quite nauseating. When Eisenhower issued a statement saying the film was a travesty of history, it secured its place in the Hall of Shame for war movies. First place, Lisa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Some movies are bad because of poor filmmaking. Others are bad because they're morally reprehensible. Ilsa manages both feats simultaneously. This exploitation horror film about a fictional Nazi concentration camp commandant who conducts sadistic experiments on prisoners represents the absolute nadir of 1970s Nazi-sploitation cinema. The film was actually shot on the leftover sets from the TV show Hogan's Heroes, which tells you everything about the production's level of taste and respect. Critics weren't just negative, they were disgusted. Film historian Cathal Toe-Hill called it a film so tacky and distasteful that it makes Caligula look like The Sound of Music. Despite its terrible reputation, it spawned 3 sequels, each worse than the last. The film remains banned in several countries and stands as perhaps the most shameful example of using World War II's real horrors as backdrop for cheap, exploitative thrills. Some bad movies are laughably bad. Ilsa is deplorably bad. War movies occupy a special place in cinema, telling stories of humanity's greatest conflicts. But when filmmakers get it wrong, they don't just make bad films, they disrespect history itself. From John Wayne's tone-deaf Vietnam propaganda in the Green Berets to Michael Bay turning Pearl Harbor into a teenage romance novel with explosions, these movies stand as warnings about what happens when Hollywood cares more about spectacle than substance. But what do you think? Did your most hated war movie make our list? Or did we include a film you secretly enjoy? Let us know in the comments below, and tell us which director you think should be court-martialed for crimes against cinema history.